Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf because there is ghost possessing me and it's telling me that it's finally time to start this very long string of Frances Hardinge videos. Today we are talking about A Skinful of Shadows. I'm just going to pause because I do this every time I talk about this book. I feel the need to share with you the spot UV on the inside cover. Ugh. It's so exciting. I'm just staring at it in the viewfinder. It's fabulous. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I bought this book myself. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. I'm also going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible, but if you do want to go into this book knowing absolutely nothing, don't watch a review video for it. Don't know what to tell you. And lastly, there are a couple of content warnings that would apply with this book. I will pop some of them up on screen because I need to remind myself. I will say this is written for a YA audience. It's not like grimdark or anything, but just I thought I'd mention it as a reminder for editing me to put those in. I bought this gorgeous copy of Skinful of Shadows in foils at the South Bank many years ago. I can't remember why I was there. It was 1000% a cover buy. I thought it was absolutely beautiful and I wanted to possess it. I magpied right towards it. And it was actually the first Frances Hardinge book I ever bought. I don't know if it was the first one I ever read, but I think it probably was. I tend to read my TBR in order. I think I would describe it as a young adult book. A lot of her stuff gets kind of like put in between young adult and middle grade for some reason. I think the covers don't do it a huge amount of service there, but that's by the by. So I would say this is more YA, but I do think it also has some crossover appeal into adult. You just have to be wanting to read the perspective of a child. That's a theme that you'll see in a number of these Frances Hardinge reviews. This came out in 2017, so there you go, it must have been in 2017, that's why would they have had hardbacks. Why was I in London in 2017? Frances Hardinge is an English author. She has written heaps and heaps of stuff, many of which have been award-winning. You can go check it out on her website below. She originally studied at Oxford, and then she's been basically a full-time writer, apart from a small foray into software stuff at some point. Set against the backdrop of the English Civil War, we meet our main character, Makepeace, who is a girl who would have a pretty ordinary, if a bit sad, life, if it weren't for the fact that she can see ghosts, and is currently possessed by the ghost of a bear which lives inside her. As 12-year-old Makepeace plans her escape from her terrible living situation, she learns some things about herself and her family history that she maybe wasn't expecting. She might have been better off not knowing. And is possession by ghosts better or worse than death? I think I would describe this as an adventure, fantasy, historical story. That would be my 4 keywords. 3 keywords, story isn't really a keyword there. One thing I really like about this book is that it blends fantasy and history into a really cohesive world. One of my favourite things is historical fantasy novels. I don't read a huge number of them. I tend to read more just like, bam, fantasy, and at most it'll be like vaguely inspired by this event in history. But in this case, the English Civil War is something I hadn't studied since I was probably a kid. Yeah, it was interesting to dip back into that world. Obviously this isn't getting into like ridiculous amounts of detail about the English Civil War, and it's also seen through the eyes of a child who probably, because of the amount of information going around, doesn't fully understand everything that's going on. Like, we can look back on history with wonderful amounts of hindsight and see all the different little pieces. Makepeace cannot necessarily do that. I think Frances Hardinge has done enough research that it feels like you're in the right time period, but you have the fallback of, this is a fantasy novel, we're okay, it doesn't matter, she can see ghosts. So I mentioned wanting to read a book through the eyes of a child. I think that's sometimes something I want and sometimes something I'm not here for, and it usually depends on the writer, and I find that Frances Hardinge's child main characters I actually really enjoy, and she writes them with a certain amount of like spark and gumption that I very much enjoy, and often they are very naive characters, or characters who have been sheltered from their real situation in some way, shape or form. And that's no exception here. And that's something we'll come across in a few other books in this section of Overbooked. But I think what I like is that the characters are never naive to the point of irritation. Sometimes you have characters who the actual problem and the solution can be staring them in the face and they just won't do anything about it, and the plot doesn't really tell you why. And I think in this case you get a really good understanding of why Makepeace is who she is and why she does what she does, and that's something that I think makes her a really compelling character. So I feel like even if you're someone who doesn't typically enjoy reading books from the perspective of a child or a young person, she's 12, this might be something you'd enjoy. I mean, if that's something that you've never liked ever in your entire life, probably not. But for me, it really works. It's partly why I don't read a lot of middle grade, because I get very annoyed at children. Anyway, I also think that the atmosphere of the book is just fantastic. I've mentioned this as a spooky book to read before in a couple of videos. I think it's got ghosts and ghouls in it. It's good fun. But what I actually really enjoy is the general threat atmosphere that Frances Hardinge manages to create without making it overtly a suspense book. It's just very creepy. And there are a lot of moments where, when you read it the first time, everything feels like pretty safe, but you just have this little like, oh, feeling in the back of your head. That's the best way I can describe that. And then on rereads, you get the full like, don't go behind the door, don't do it feeling that I really enjoy. So the rereadability of this book is also excellent. I've read it at least twice now, and I've enjoyed it every single time I've read it. Frances Hardinge's books have great rereadability. I would say that the atmosphere is a big reason to pick this up. I think it's not my favourite Frances Hardinge book in terms of the atmosphere, but we'll come on to that in due course. Obviously, if you're not a YA or middle grade or around that age bracket reader, this isn't going to be something for you. I do think that there is crossover appeal. I think as an adult I can read this and enjoy it, and I don't feel that kind of like, okay, I've got to switch off this part of my brain that's thinking about, you know, Robin Hobb's fantasy because I'm reading this. It just feels like something that works for me anyway. However, this isn't where I would start with Hardinge. So I'm starting with it now because this is the first Frances Hardinge book that I bought and read, and I thought that would be a nice starting point for us. I don't think it's where I would begin if I was picking up Frances Hardinge. Where would I start? I would start at Deep Light because it's my favourite, but I think there are other options, and maybe by the end of this we will have decided. Some other things to read that aren't Frances Hardinge if you did want to pick this up. We will come on to that in the coming weeks. I'm not going to talk about it all in this first video, or every video is going to start to feel like a parrot. Other alternative history, The Bear and the Nightingale, set in 14th, 15th century Russia. Another similar girl who has magical powers in some way, shape or form, supernatural abilities, in this big turning point in history, and how does she fit into it? I really enjoy that. Oh, do I have anything else vaguely historical on these shelves? Oh, it's going to be completely wedged in here because these are, but She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan is another history-inspired book that I really enjoy. I'm trying to think if there's any other middle grade-esque books that I have read and enjoyed and kept hanging around onto. It's always going to be Edge Chronicles, that's just always where I go. Not similar at all, but in terms of like crossover appeal age bracket, Edge Chronicles is where it's at. Should you read this? Yes, absolutely. I don't even have to think about it. You should read all Frances Hardinge books. She's an exceptional author who creates amazing worlds. Is this where I would start? No, but we will come on to that next week's video. I think let's keep it short and sweet. We're going to have enough to talk about over the coming weeks, so I shall sign off now. Have you read this? Do you have plans to? Do you have a favourite middle grade YA kind of author that you really enjoy, that you've read all of their books, even if they're all standalones? Let me know in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord. We have a wonderful time. I think that's all the things. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Today we are reading Skinful of Shadows. Today we're talking about... Let's just pause for a greeting. Hi, please don't cry into the microphone. Please don't cry into the microphone. I love you. Go to bed.